the Senate Banking Committee, as we just announced, approved Janet Yellen's nomination as the next Fed chair, despite the fact that some Democrats are now actually turning against her. More on that in a moment. But with today's abolishment of some filibuster rules in the Senate, is her approval assured? And if so, what can we expect with her at the helm? Joining us now for a first on Fox Business is former Texas Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. Wonderful to see you, Dr. Paul. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Well,
nice to see you.
First of all, on this rule change, some people had said it was coming. Others said they thought it was a little too radical, even for Harry Reid. What do you think about it?
I think it's radical. I think, reversing and canceling out Jefferson's rules have been around for a bit. No, I think, and they talk about minor judges, but I think that they're making it so that they can get her appointed with a majority vote rather than going with the 60.
Well, let me just stop you right there. So you think the rule change specifically was because of the vote for her, for Janet Yellen? That's why they changed the rules?
There's no way for me to know, but I speculate that that's a very strong possibility. It seems like she's a much more important person than some of these minor judges. Hardly anybody in the country knows which judges they're talking about. But I think the best I can tell, it will apply to Yellen under the new rule, which means it makes it easier. And, that vote was not overwhelming.
No, and we'll talk about that. But again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you do have a source inside the U.S. Senate, your son, Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul. Was he planning to filibuster Janet Yellen?
I do not know that with certainty. I know what he has said, and he had talked about it, and I know he doesn't like her monetary policy. I dislike the system and think she's more of the same, only worse. But he thinks she's really a lot worse, that she's a really strong inflationist. And I don't think she hides that. I keep thinking we're going to continue with the QEs, and we're up to QE3 now. But I think we're more likely to have another QE than we are to have tapering. So maybe next year when she gets control of this thing, we're going to have QEY. That's what I'm anticipating.
Well, even some Democrats, we expect you to say that and your son Rand Paul, but even some Democrats have turned against QE and against her specifically. Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, voted against her. And this is what he said. Her views and beliefs to continue quantitative easing, despite a failure to see any real gains, greatly troubles me. Do you think there will be other Democrats besides Senator Manchin coming over to that view?
Well, I think that's very possible. This to me is very impressive because it means that they're not buying into all the propaganda. I mean, why are these conventional politicians talking this way and worried about QE? That means they're worried about inflation, yet our government and our Fed says, oh, there's no inflation, don't sweat it. We have a lot of room, and yet here we have a growing number of people concerned about the inflationary policies of what they're doing with this massive purchase of bonds. So I would say it's a healthy wake-up call, and I'm sure she'll be appointed, but I think the discussion is going to be very, very valuable.
Yeah. Now, it's not only Democratic senators and congressmen. There are also some former Fed officials who've been coming out and speaking out against this policy. In her views, we had that piece in the Wall Street Journal about a week ago by the guy, Andrew Hussar, who was responsible for a lot of the purchases of the mortgage-backed securities by the Fed. He said, I'm sorry, America. I've come to recognize that QE for what it really is, the greatest backdoor Wall Street bailout of all time, from a former Fed official.
Yeah, and matter of fact, I interviewed on my Ron Paul channel and found it fascinating what he had to say, because he was in charge of the QE1, where he was literally in charge of purchasing $1.2 trillion worth of bonds. And I was kidding him. I said, you're bigger than the U.S. Congress put together. His package right there, he had control of more money than the U.S. Congress did.
Wow.
That's how astounding the Federal Reserve System is, all done in secrecy. Hopefully we'll get more transparency. Matter of fact, that came up in Yellen's hearing because somebody did ask about audit the Fed bill, and of course she says, "No, I'm for I'm for transparency, but I'm not for that bill."
Yeah.
So I think we're making great progress because we're a long way off from settled markets, in spite of what the apparent boom is doing now, and the stocks are doing well and all this. But I know that there's a lot of people that feel the uncertainty, and I think that that's justified.
Yeah, certainly on Main Street there is a lot of uncertainty. Okay, on the Fed audit thing, some people in defense of the Fed will say, hey, look, Dodd-Frank has specific measures in it to assure that there is enough auditing done of the Fed, to which you say what?
I say the bankers get to write most of those regulations. So every time we have a crisis, we write more regulations, and that seems to hinder the recovery. It started with SECs in the 30s, and of course there was Sarbanes-Oxley when we had the crisis 10 years ago, and now we have more of this. Regulations can't overcome bad mistakes, and this is sort of what's happening with Obamacare. Just more and more regulations of central economic planning, which is unachievable. And so all the regulations in the world will just confuse things. It will dampen the enthusiasm. It chases business away, costs more money. And that's one of the major reasons why we have the economy doing so poorly. So, no, that can't save it.
Gotcha.
It just props it up. If it temporarily helps, it just delays it and makes the crisis that much worse.
Dr. Ron Paul, by the way, are you birthing babies again now that you're out of Congress?
No, I'm just trying to spread the great message of liberty, and I'm staying busy.
All right, all right. But he did birth 3,000 babies, so he's done his work in the medical field as well. Dr. Paul, good to see you. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Liz?